I'll take people who are fuck-ups for 1,000, Alex.
You don't have to be poor anymore. Jesus is here.
The loudspeaker spoke up and said, Christianity is stupid.
Greetings, fellow worker slaves, podcasting at 128 kilobits from the Fortress of Squalitude. This is the Atheist in the Trailer Park podcast. I'm your host, Tucker. Professor Fuzznuts is in the kitchen somewhere. Yes, it's a podcast hosted by a guy and his cat. Get over it. This is a I done fucked everything up episode, so now I gotta whip something out of my ass. It was supposed to be Jake, as I explained last night, from the Arctic Atheist podcast, and I reading from the Wisdom of Solomon, but there was a glitch with the software and the bulk of the recording is useless. Naturally, I didn't discover that until it was too late for us to re-record the episode before I had to post it. So I gave you that half-assed little thing last night, and now I'm going to give you something that's slightly better, though I won't promise how much better, than what I handed out last night. And as I said, Jake and I will record on Friday evening, assuming all goes well, and I will have that posted on Saturday. And then I will ding the Patreon subscribers for that episode, as well as the regular episode that goes out on Sunday. This one's a freebie for everybody. And speaking of the Patreon subscribers, I need to thank George for increasing his support. It's the first of the month, and of course, the auto pay on a number of things like my hosting service, cell phone, internet access, etc., etc. You know, all the stuff we just can't seem to live without in this modern world, all hit at once, wiping out my bank account, so that were it not for the Patreon supporters, I'd have just $60 or so to get me to payday. Now, I've got about twice that, so thanks to him and everyone else who supports the show. You're helping me keep the roof over my head and Fuzznuts fed. In a way, it's not as horrific as it might seem that I lost the recording, because thanks to Facebook, I discovered an article which really is the best thing I've read on why Donald Trump is such a threat to both American democracy and the world. Somewhat appropriately enough, it's written by David Frum, who's a former speechwriter for George W. Bush. So you can't exactly accuse him of being a butthurt lefty. I will, of course, have a link to it in the show notes. The title of the article is How to Build an Autocracy. The short version of the article is that so long as Republicans aren't willing to stand up to Trump, which they don't seem to be, and the Democrats are a minority party in Congress, he can pretty much do what he wants, regardless of what the Constitution says. The reason for this is that the Constitution doesn't provide an automatic mechanism to place a check on the power of any branch of government. The Founding Fathers assumed that if either the executive or legislative branch got out of control, the other branch would respond by suing them, and the judicial branch would apply the necessary brakes to the action. And if the judicial branch got out of hand, then the executive and legislative branches would work together to remedy that situation. If none of them are willing to bring the other before the courts or hold the courts accountable, then there's little that the average citizen can do. They can vote out members of Congress and hope that their replacements decide to deal with the matter, but thanks to gerrymandering, most members of Congress, regardless of party, are secure in their offices. There is also the issue of Trump's popularity. Sure, he's got lousy favorability ratings, but look what happened to Representative Paul Ryan when he didn't enthusiastically support Trump after Trump got the nomination. Ryan quickly found himself subject to vitriol, not only from Trump, but the Republican base, and Ryan shifted position on the matter. As I record this, Senator Mitch McConnell, who's the majority leader in the Senate, has slightly defied Trump in that he said he doesn't think federal dollars should be spent on investigating Trump's claims of voter fraud. So far, there hasn't been any reaction from Trump on this that I've heard. Trump seems to be more upset with the fact that the courts are blocking his Muslim ban. How long this will continue, I don't know, and Mitch is up for re-election in 2020, which is an eternity in U.S. politics. If someone decides to run against McConnell in the primary, Trump may choose to back them out of spite, or he might have forgotten about McConnell's words by then. We will see what happens regardless. Even if Trump does nothing now, don't be surprised if he doesn't suddenly come down on McConnell at a later date. I've mentioned on the podcast before that a former boss of mine worked for Trump, and one of the things he said about Trump, in addition to saying that if you think you've gotten a good deal with Trump, you obviously didn't read the fine print, is that Trump wants people to think that he's a great man. And if you do something which implies Trump isn't a great man, you automatically become his enemy. Now, I'm going to get into some speculation here, so feel free to ignore what I have to say, but I'm going to talk about it as it does seem to fit with the pattern of behavior Trump has exhibited. Also, it shows why we can't expect even the people who work closely with Trump to bail on him anytime soon. I have worked with people who exhibit the same kinds of behavior patterns as Trump does. Trump is said to have narcissistic personality disorder, and I'm not a mental health professional, so I can't say if he does, nor can I say that the people I worked for did. But there sure seem to be a lot of parallels between their actions. Let me describe some of these behaviors, and you can decide if they match Trump or not. 1. They always talk about the great things they're going to do, but never seem to have any specifics as how they're going to accomplish them. 2. Any slight against them is met with exponential levels of wrath. You might say that you disagreed with them on a minor matter, but they respond as if you've killed their best friend. 3. They are never willing to take responsibility for anything that goes wrong around them. 4. Many of the people surrounding them aren't qualified to do the things asked of them. 5. Highly qualified people either quickly distance themselves from the individual in question or refuse to have much of anything to do with that person to begin with. Now, the kind of person I'm describing here could either be Trump or a former boss of mine whom I'll call Mike because Mike has the annoying habit of suing people he doesn't like. Mike doesn't often win such cases, but I can't exactly afford to spend any time in court. Both of them are well known for doing such things. What Mike would do, and I suspect that Trump is doing the same kind of thing, is spin great yarns about the kinds of things that he wanted to do. Mike would believe these things as he said them, but 5 minutes after they left his mouth, he'd completely forget about them. He wasn't lying in the sense that he knew he had no intention of doing whatever it was that he just said, but he was lying in the sense that he had the necessary focus to actually be able to carry them out. So Mike would describe how he's going to build this great company and how the people who worked for him would revolutionize the industry, but when it came time for Mike to put in the necessary effort to make it happen, there was always some other pressing matter which Mike claimed prohibited him from dealing with it. Or he'd hand the matter off to someone who didn't have the necessary skills, or if they did, he wouldn't give them the means to accomplish the task. Mike wanted an increase in sales, but wasn't willing to spend even $50 for advertising, which means you either tried to find ways to advertise that didn't involve money, or you paid for it yourself. Gradually, as someone's day-to-day needs became more pressing than the carrot Mike dangled just out of their reach, people would start abandoning him. Sometimes it would be hostile on their part, other times they'd just stop coming to work. Mike always, however, took these abandonments as a personal slight. We nearly always have an employee meeting a day or two after someone quit in which Mike would spend the entire time haranguing us about what a bad person whomever it was who had quit had been. Not once was there a plea to talk to him before you quit or anything approaching human decency. The person who quit had fucked Mike, or if they hadn't fucked him, somebody else working for him had tricked the person into quitting, and thus they had fucked Mike. Mike had been perfect in everything he'd done. Does that or does that not sound like Trump? In his article, Fromm makes similar claims about Trump, and he makes the suggestion that the real danger is that many of the people in power in Washington, like Paul Ryan, are merely manipulating Trump for their own ends. He believes that at some point these people will cast Trump aside, but the damage to American democracy will already be done by this point, and it won't matter who takes power after Trump. They'll be able to wield power like no one else has, so even if a rational political figure takes over after Trump, there will be few mechanisms to keep them in check, and it's merely a matter of time before things turn to shit. I will agree with Fromm that I think this is a distinct possibility, but I don't necessarily see it as being the most likely. Not that I think that the most likely outcome is more optimistic than Fromm's. For starters, I can't see folks like Ryan abandoning Trump. To do so would require them to have more political savvy than what they've displayed. Take the repeal of Obamacare. They have been so focused upon getting rid of it that they haven't bothered to even think of any kind of alternative, even though they said they had one. If they were even remotely savvy about something, they would have had an idea, even a half-baked one. They don't, because like the dog that chases a car, their only interest is in going after it. Once they've caught it, they don't know what to do. What are they going to do when they realize that the monster they've created is running loose and isn't listening to them anymore? Already, Trump has been pushing the crazy idea that he would have won the popular vote if it weren't for so many illegal votes cast for Hillary. If he's so butthurt over an election where he won, what is he going to do if he loses both the popular and the electoral college vote in 2020? The GOP hasn't come out and said that they disagree with the president on illegals voting, only that they don't think that federal money should be spent on such thing. Mitch McConnell's passing the buck to the states, saying that they should be the ones to investigate the matter. That's never going to happen. The states which went for Hillary aren't going to investigate because no matter the outcome, it wouldn't change the election, and the states that went for Trump don't care because their guy won, so the claim by Trump will go unrebuked. And if in 2020 Trump loses the vote, what are folks going to do if he says there was fraud? I'm staying. And this is where I have to stop myself. Yesterday, I had this episode all worked out as to what I was going to say. But when I listened back to it, I realized I didn't want to put it out because it would sound like the ramblings of a madman, and that's not quite the level of crazy I want to be. I will say this, when it came to Bush, McCain, and Romney, there were basic elements of the Constitution which I automatically assumed they would respect. Yes, there were things they did that scared me, but all of them showed by their actions that they held some respect for what the Constitution stood for. I don't think that Trump's ever bothered to read the Constitution or even has any idea of what it says. He ran for office not because he had a vision for America, but simply because he saw it as a means to enrich himself and have people refer to him as the most powerful man in the world. Nor do I necessarily think that those reasons fall in that order. I also don't see Trump getting frustrated and giving up before his term is over. To do so would be forcing him to admit failure. Considering that he can't even admit that he lost the popular vote, can you see him admitting that he lacked what it took to be president and handing things over to Pence? I can't. Maybe he'll surprise me and step down, or maybe Paul Ryan will find his spine and stand up to Trump. I don't know. I do know that Mike, my former boss, is still out there running the same kind of company, telling the same kind of lies, and stealing from people despite having spent nearly a decade in prison for doing it before. I think Trump's going to be just like Mike and continue doing the same things he's done for so long now. Read Trump's article. It's linked to in the show notes. Get involved with the local branches of whatever political party you happen to find yourself most aligned with, and do it now. If Trump's right, then a lot is at risk, no matter who our next president might be. The biggest mistake I think people on both sides of the aisle have made is in believing that they knew how to handle Trump. You had everybody basically on the Democratic side who was, oh, well, Hillary's got this. I mean, how could anybody vote for Trump? And you have people on the Republican side say, he's our guy, we'll handle him, we can deal with him, and so on. But all of them have quickly found out that that's not the case. Obviously, Hillary got her awakening on election night, but I don't think the Republicans have fully come to their awakening of what Trump is like. The first clue that everybody should have had that Trump's campaign wasn't going to go quietly and fade away was when he said McCain was not a war hero because McCain got captured. Can you picture any other presidential candidate or candidate for any office getting away with that and getting the nomination, let alone winning the presidency? No. If George H.W. Bush or George W. Bush or Mitt Romney or whomever had said the same thing about McCain, their career would have been over. Trump didn't have that. Trump said it, everybody went, ooh, and yet his numbers kept going up. And then, of course, there was, him making fun of the disabled reporter. There was him, talking about Megyn Kelly. There is any number of things, audio tape of him coming out. None of it really wrecked him. And the reason for that was because all the Republicans could throw up against him to try and block him in their own party were people who were inept. If they weren't inept before they came up against Trump, they certainly appeared that way when they did come up against him. They had Mitt Romney talk about what a terrible person Trump was. Well, when Romney ran in 2012, the Republicans weren't exactly enthusiastically behind him. Most of them were like, I'm just going to vote for him because I don't want to vote for Obama. He's not the greatest, but he's not Obama. Yay! And Trump said, hey, my followers are very loyal. I could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and they'd still vote for me. He wasn't kidding. Wasn't kidding. People who follow Trump and agree with him, they're not rationally siding with him. So you're not going to be able to dislodge him by sending Romney the robot out there to say, he does not compute. He is a terrible man. He is this. That just strengthens Trump in the eyes of those people because Romney exhibited many of the worst characteristics of republicanism. He was this really stiff white guy who was uptight about stuff, didn't get things. Trump, he walks out there casually, mouths off, says things. And let's face it, who hasn't watched a politician of any party? You sat there, watched them on TV, and they've said stuff, and you've responded to them like, oh, you're a fucking idiot. What the fuck do you know? Well, Trump just went out there on stage and did that. So he was fulfilling the dreams of all these people out there. And he was just saying, Kennedy won the 1960 election because people, men looked at Kennedy and saw who they wanted to be, and they looked at Nixon and saw who they were. Not necessarily true, but in the case of Trump, a lot of people did see that, because here was a guy who came in, did whatever he wanted, said whatever he wanted, and there were no consequences for it. He didn't have to worry if he got fired. He didn't have to worry if he lost the nomination. He was still a billionaire. He was still going to do stuff. That's a powerful attractant to people who feel like their lives are going nowhere. Okay, and unfortunately, I'm going to have to cut this off short as it's getting late. I've got to get to bed early because I have to get up early to work overtime tomorrow because I'm bored. So I got to end it now. I'm afraid I will leave you with a nice bit of news that should compensate for some of the darkness that's been in this episode. I will have a link to it in the show notes, but it's an article by Vox entitled "The Big Lesson of Trump's First 2 Weeks: Resistance Works." And it talks about how, in the face of public pressure, Trump has backed down on a number of things. Additionally, I don't know if you saw it or not, but the SNL parody they did of Trump's spokesperson Spicer by I don't know her name, McCarthy something or other McCarthy, really upset them in the White House because apparently they were really bothered by a woman portraying Spicer. Seen the bit? It's funny as hell, and she really does pull him off disturbingly well. So I'll have a link to that in the show notes as well, so you can check that out. But I do have to get out of here because I've got to edit it and get in bed, and Fuzznuts is demanding attention, so that's going to detract things even more. Apologize for the shortness. I will talk to you guys on Saturday.
That's it for this episode of The Atheist in the Trailer Park Podcast. You can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Stitcher, as well as just about anywhere else podcasts can be found. Many of the episodes are also on YouTube. Follow the show on Twitter. @TParkAtheist is the show's Twitter handle. It's on Facebook at facebook.com/trailerparkatheist.com. If you happen to like the podcast, please rate it on iTunes. If you'd like to support the podcast, there's a donate button on the show notes page. You can support it via Patreon at patreon.com/TNTucker. Thanks for listening.
Say goodnight, Fuzznuts.
All I know is this violates every canon of respectable broadcasting.
Damned cat.